Welcome, everybody. Um, this is Placer Earth Care Action. PICA presents, and Ken Moore will be sharing with us a program on methane busters. I have interest in this for two or three different reasons. I understand this program is going to be a real gas. No. All right. Well, let's begin. Dr. Ken Moore, talk to us about methane busters.
Okay, well, why methane? Methane is a hidden force that's accelerating climate change. There's an interesting diagram over here. You know, most of the pollution is from CO2, 99%, only 1% is from methane, but methane is 84 times more potent than carbon dioxide. And so it creates a huge problem for the environment and climate change, even though it's a minute portion compared to all the CO2 that's being released. It comes from a number of different sources. It comes from burning natural gas in our stoves and so on. It comes from burps from cows and other animals. It comes from landfills. Uh, So there are a number of major sources, and it matters because if we're going to get to net zero, which is what everyone's talking about as being the goal towards mid-century, we're not only going to have to be able to reduce the CO2 by driving electric and buying electric appliances and so on, but we also need to be addressing the threat that methane is causing. Okay. We need to move the slide. There we go. And this is a little diagram. I know it's hard to see because it's small, but it just shows kind of an illustration of a natural scene and all the places in that natural scene where methane is being created and finding its way into the atmosphere. And so methane levels have been steadily increasing for the last 40 years. It's up about 17% in that period of time. And here's a diagram from the Weather Service. They have one of these locations where they keep track of the weather and climate on the top of a mountain in Hawaii. And this shows the diagram. The green line is CO2 marching upward into 2024. And below it is the line of methane. And it's a little more staggered and it's not going up as quickly as the CO2, but it's also on an upward trajectory. So, what we're going to learn about today are what I call the methane busters. Because what's happened in just a relatively recent period of time is that we've developed technologies to find out where the methane is leaking. And for about 5 years now, we've had satellites up in space that are doing amazing work of pinpointing the major sources of methane that's being released in the atmosphere. We have vehicles like the one you see in the upper left-hand corner that drive around and they particularly target areas to drive around where they suspect there are methane leaks. And then there are these very expensive cameras that cost a couple $1,000s. And you can take your picture with your camera, and what the picture sees is it shows all the methane, the kind of clouds of methane that's being released, whether it's from vehicles or from oil refineries or whatever it may be. And so, with much better methane detection, we're able to bust some of the major producers of methane, and finding ways that we can change our environmental practices to deal with the methane challenge. Bill McKibben has some good news about California. He says people aren't talking about it or writing much about it, but the biggest news of the year comes from this state. You've now got so many solar panels and batteries that the Golden State used 25% less natural gas in 2024 to make electricity than in 2023. And that's a big number. So, I mean, one of the big challenges of dealing with the problem of methane is just using less natural gas besides busting the places where methane's leaking from. And so on this pathway to net zero, we're going to need to address CO2. And we got really big numbers from CO2, smaller numbers from methane. But unless we get the whole picture of both the CO2 and the methane, we aren't going to get to a healthy planet by mid-century. Now, one of the sources of methane is from cows, and there's lots of smiles and so on from people when they think of cow burps as being a source of methane. The amount that comes from a cow is it takes about 2 cows equal to the pollution from one car. I thought that was interesting. You know, 504 pounds of methane from 2 cows is equal to 11,592 pounds of carbon dioxide from a car that drives about 10,000 miles a year, kind of an average car. So uh, we need to address the car problem by going electric if possible. Uh, a lot of people are at least going hybrid, and that's better, but electric is best. And we need to address the cow problem. And so one of the promising solutions to the cow problem of cow burps is a vaccine for cows. And so we're going to watch a brief uh, videotape, a brief program where they talk about what the experience has been with a cow vaccine that would reduce cow burps.
Imagine a vaccine for cow burps. Sounds like science fiction, right? Well, buckle up because this is real, and it's making waves in the battle against climate change. We all know climate change is a big deal, but did you know cow burps are contributing to the problem? That's right. These seemingly harmless burps are packed with methane, a gas that's 28 times more potent than carbon dioxide. Enter ArchaeaBio, a US startup that's turning heads with a game-changing solution. They've developed a prototype vaccine that slashed methane emissions from cows by 13% in trials. Yes, you heard that correctly. A vaccine for cow burps. So how does this magic elixir work? The vaccine targets methane-producing microbes called methanogens in cows' digestive tracts. It stimulates antibodies that bind to and neutralize these microbes, reducing methane production. Farmers will likely need to give their cows this vaccine twice a year. It's a small change with a big impact, potentially cutting down on one of the major sources of methane emissions. Why is this so important? Methane is a major player in global warming, contributing to about 30% of the problem. Livestock alone account for 11 to 17% of all greenhouse gas emissions. So tackling cow burps could make a huge difference. But ArchaeaBio isn't alone in this. Companies are also exploring seaweed supplements and even cattle masks to cut methane. Each method has its pros and cons, but the vaccine offers a promising, scalable solution.
Okay, so one of the solutions of cow burps is changing a cattle's diet and changing to high the quality forage like legumes makes the digestion easy. They're low in fiber and contain highly soluble carbohydrates, which produce less methane. So changing a diet is one thing. Uh, the most promising thing that they found to address cow bark is the addition of nitrooxypropanol to the feed of dairy cattle. And this is being done in Europe right now, and there are a number of countries where it is uh, being in use now. And the tests have found that the amount of methane from cows decreases as much as 50% by adding this one ingredient to their feedstocks. And the U.S. Food and Drug Administration has currently certified this as meeting its safety and efficacy standards for cattle. And so it's just about at the point of being adopted in the United States as well. And so this could have a big effect on cow birth. One of the things that was mentioned was cow masks, and they have here's a cow wearing its mask, and they have been trying this, but it's very labor intensive and so on, and so it's more difficult to adopt and changing feed and so on is probably being going to be the most productive way to deal with cow births. One other thing that the scientists are looking at is genetic selection of helping develop cows that are less likely to burp than other cows. And so there are just a lot of different ways that scientists are looking at this issue to try to reduce the methane from cows. One of the things that is not mentioned in these slides, but is probably the most important thing that we could do, and that is eat less beef and have a plant-based diet. That would be the most important thing that we could do. But it's going to take a while to get people to change from their love of beef uh, to find all the delicious and healthy ways that we can enjoy our meals that are plant-based. Another source of pollution from the environment comes from the way we grow rice, and so they found that just uh, changing the way that they put water on the rice fields, that they can reduce the methane from rice production by about 50%. And so China particularly has been implementing this process among their rice growing population to just it doesn't affect the production, the amount of rice produced or anything, but just the times that it's underwater, uh, doing that in a slightly different way reduces methane production by about 50%. So, thanks to the satellites that they have up there now that do methane detection, they can uh, have the satellite located wherever they need it to be uh, to spot certain areas. And this is a map that shows the super emitters that they've been able to identify from these satellites. And as you can see, the southern part of the United States and northern Mexico are super emitters. Uh, and then Eastern Europe is huge, and uh, Syria, Iraq, those areas down to India, uh, parts of parts of China, uh, lots of super emitters that need to be addressed. Here in the United States, more than 3.7 million oil and gas wells dot our country, spewing 8.2 million metric tons of methane and pollutants into the air every year, according to the EPA. hopefully they will continue to be monitoring this in our new streamlined government. But that's the equivalent to the carbon dioxide from 1.8 million cars that they emit every year. More than half of these wells, that is 58% of them, are unplugged, and at least 125,000 wells are what they call orphan wells, meaning that the regulators no longer know which company or owner is responsible or accountable for those wells. And we got a little clip here just to let you see what a methane leak looks like and what it sounds like. It does not smell particularly. And so that's one of the things, it's invisible kind of pollutant that you don't necessarily see unless you have one of those fancy cameras where it looks like a billowing smoke pouring out. But this is like one of many thousands of wells in the United States that are leaking methane. Can't smell it. All you hear is a little blip, 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 blip. But it's pouring methane into the atmosphere. The average cost of capping a well is $75,000. Recognizing the urgency of this issue, the federal government allocated as part of the Inflation Reduction Act $1.36 billion to measure and reduce methane emissions, plus $5 billion to use to plug orphaned wells. Now that sounds like a lot of money, and hopefully it will still be there in the next few years, but we shall see. And while it sounds like a lot of money, it's not far enough. In California alone, more than 41,000 wells sit idle, and the Sierra Club estimates that cleaning and plugging them all will cost $23 billion. So, when we buy gas in the gas station, what we aren't paying for is all the environmental damage that the oil industry is doing and what it's doing to our air. And so here's a little clip from a scientist and his experience of the natural gas problem.
Darlong Chang had joined ExxonMobil after getting his PhD in mechanical engineering. He worked on conventional natural gas projects abroad before becoming part of the company's fracking push in the U.S.
My peers, when they were recruiting me, they told me that ExxonMobil was going to be part of the energy transition over my career. They talked about the excitement of having gas be a bridge fuel to the future of energy.
I think one of the biggest challenges that the world is facing today is to develop all the energy we need in an environmentally friendly way.
The fact that natural gas was much cleaner burning than coal, that it produced half the carbon dioxide emissions of coal, those are very appealing to me.
But Chang knew that the methane in natural gas had the potential to do significant damage if allowed to leak into the atmosphere.
Natural gas is primarily methane, and methane, when it's leaked out into the atmosphere, can have orders of magnitude more global warming impact than carbon dioxide.
Chang worried that the thousands of new, lightly regulated fracking operations in the U.S. could be leaking massive amounts of methane and turbocharge the climate crisis.
Shale gas was like the Wild West. There was already a perception that these smaller operators were not acting responsibly with these shale gas wells. Already felt that having many methane gas wells was a ticking time bomb for methane gas leaks. The more engineering infrastructure, the more wells and the more pipes, the more potential there is for leakage. When they were marketing natural gas as clean energy, they didn't really know what they were talking about because they were fixated on the idea that natural gas, when burned, produces half the carbon dioxide emissions of coal. But without measurement devices to verify that you're not significantly leaking, you can't be sure that your natural gas is actually giving you less of a global warming impact than coal. The industry was not monitoring methane leakage, so they did not have data about how much was leaking. And there wasn't much appetite for management to measure methane leakage because if they found out there was a problem, they would have to do something about it.
At the time, ExxonMobil and others in the industry said they were working to reduce methane emissions, which were already within limits set by the EPA.
Okay. So, another clip here.
We've all heard about carbon dioxide in our atmosphere causing warming, haven't we? Levels have been rising since the Industrial Revolution and accelerating rapidly in recent years. The science of how CO2 captures infrared light radiation bouncing off the surface of our planet is absolutely clear and unequivocal, and it represents the most significant climate forcing factor. But what about the other major greenhouse gas, the one we hear far less about, the one that could in fact make the difference between keeping below 2 degrees Celsius of warming and straying up towards 3 degrees or more, the one our friends in the fossil fuel industry politely refer to as natural gas, but which is more correctly known as methane, or methane if you're in North America. Well, it looks like the world has been asleep at the wheel on this one, and to all intents and purposes has been completely ignoring a growing problem for decades. Now though, state-of-the-art observational satellite data coupled with ground-based research is beginning to reveal the extent of the predicament. It's not good. Hello.
He has some more information, but you have to sit through a commercial. So we'll just skip on and we'll move on to this one. This guy's more fun to listen to.
Natural gas. It sounds environmentally friendly, like natural, organic, grass-fed, farm-to-table gas. For a long time, it was pitched as a crucial bridge to a cleaner, greener future.
I got a plan, which is to use natural gas as a cleaner, cheaper bridge fuel.
Natural gas is a bridge fuel to reduce our carbon footprint.
I think the natural gas boom is good. It's an important bridge fuel.
Natural gas, if extracted safely, it's the bridge fuel that can power our economy with less of the carbon pollution that causes climate change.
It's true that natural gas burns cleaner than oil or coal, so in theory, it should be better for the climate. Unfortunately, that theory ignores a dirty, filthy little secret: methane. It's the primary component of natural gas and an extremely potent greenhouse gas with over 80 times the warming power of carbon dioxide over the short term. Most of the world's methane emissions come from human activity, our landfills, rice paddies, and meat consumption. And a huge amount comes from our fossil fuel production, including natural gas. As natural gas is extracted and transported, methane can leak into the atmosphere. That's really important to pay attention to because even if about 3% of it leaks, it becomes worse for the climate than coal. So if we want to determine whether natural gas is a bridge to a cleaner future, or say, the Squid Game bridge, we need to find out how much methane is leaking. Now I know what you're thinking. How much methane is leaking? Fair question, important question. And the answer is, we don't know. In fact, there are currently no laws in the US against most methane leaks, so companies don't have to keep accurate track of it. Fortunately, scientists are keeping track, and a few from Stanford recently flew over tens of thousands of wells in the Permian Basin to get a thorough accounting of methane leaks. Unfortunately, what they found was terrifying.
They were able to generate data showing that more than 9% of the methane produced in the area was actually leaking into the atmosphere.
More than 9%! That's 3 times the amount that would make natural gas worse than coal. You know how you sometimes get paranoid about leaving the gas stove on so you double check before you go to bed? Now imagine one night you forgot to double check and you left on 400,000 gas stoves in the Permian Basin. On a related note, for any obsessive stove checkers, a recent study found that your gas stove might be leaking methane even if it's off, so sleep tight. So, look, how did we overlook this problem for so long? Maybe because we literally can't look at it. Unlike oil spills, methane spills are invisible. There are exceptions, like that flaming doom hole that opened up in the Gulf of Mexico, or Turkmenistan's even scarier flaming doom hole. Thankfully, there's technology that allows us to visualize methane leaks without lighting them on fire and potentially summoning a demon. Special infrared cameras can reveal methane chimneys hiding in plain sight. Images like this help raise awareness of methane leaks and apply political pressure to regulate them. And that's starting to have an impact. Policymakers are realizing that cutting methane leaks can give them a quick win on climate. Unlike CO2, methane breaks down in the atmosphere relatively fast, so capping methane leaks could prevent as much as 1/3 of the warming expected in the next few decades. It's why the big 2022 climate bill imposed a new fee on those leaks, and that's on top of the stricter rules from the EPA. But those rules and fees will only be effective if methane leaks are measured and reported accurately, and that's a big if. A Bloomberg investigation found that companies are allowed to, ready, self-report their pollution based on their own interpretation of the EPA's rules. I mean, obviously that feels counterproductive. We wouldn't let restaurants interpret health codes themselves, or they'd be like, oh, no, y'all, that's not a rat, that's Remy. He's the finest chef in all of France. You should try his ratatouille, it's delicious. Reporting loopholes will need to be closed if we want to get serious about regulation. But beyond regulation, there should be a big financial incentive to cut methane leaks. The less of your inventory that leaks away, the more you can sell, right? And I don't know if you've checked gas prices lately, but you can make a lot of money selling this stuff. I wanted to take a closer look at this issue, so I traveled to the Permian Basin in West Texas, where one company, Triple Crown Resources, realized how much methane they were leaking and said, oh, crap. And then they said, oh, crap, we can totally save money on this. Take a look.
Okay. So an oil production field in Texas leaks methane in this satellite image that was captured in 2023. And now we're going to journey to the Permian Basin with our comedian friend and see what he discovered in meeting with the oil people there.
So, all right, here's the deal. Welcome to Triple Crown, but you will follow our safety policies, okay? You will have a representative with you at all times. If you decide to wander off, it's going to make me very unhappy. And you don't want to make me unhappy, okay?
Here in West Texas, in the middle of one of the biggest oil and gas fields in the world, people take their safety extremely seriously. At least until I show up. So safety-wise, we have these goggles, and then you have the
an H2S monitor.
So when does the farting on this thing and seeing if it beeps wear out? If I worked here, as soon as I had one of those monitors, I'd just be like, and just like test it compared to
I cannot confirm or deny it.
Okay, fine. Yes, I'm here to talk about gas, specifically methane. As the main component of natural gas, methane plays a big part in heating homes, fueling stoves, and making electricity, while releasing a lot less CO2 than coal. And the Permian Basin, a huge region that overlaps Texas and New Mexico, is absolutely crushing the natural gas game, producing more than any other part of the US. Unfortunately, the Permian Basin is also a major source of methane leaks, which is not as good of a thing to be winning at.
We're releasing a ton of methane, which makes for a lot of climate change. It could mean that natural gas is actually worse for the climate than coal.
All this brings us to why we're featuring an oil and gas company, of all things, on a show about climate solutions. Triple Crown Resources, run by Ryan here, is a small company that's bucking oil industry trends and using new technologies to get its methane leaks under control.
Oil field with friggin' laser beams.
Yes. Cool. And it's something they think everyone else can do too, for one simple reason. Curbing their pollution is making them millions. First, a quick primer on methane. Methane is really bad. Oh, you want more? Okay. I guess I'd better talk to an expert. Here's Bloomberg's Josh Saul.
Methane's a gas, and it's similar to carbon dioxide in that it warms the earth, that it causes climate change. But the problem is that it's a lot more powerful over the short term than carbon dioxide. Methane is about 80 times more powerful than carbon dioxide over the first couple of decades from when it's released at heating the earth, at causing all these effects of climate change like flooding and forest fires and all these things that we worry about. So stopping and plugging the release of methane is like one of the best things and easiest things that humans can do to stop the worst, to stop climate change.
So who's leaking all that methane? Well, it's hard to tell, since methane is an invisible gas that you can't actually see without a special infrared camera. But clearly, there's a lot of leaking going on, and not enough being done to stop it. Enter Triple Crown Resources, the tree-hugging hippies of the Texas oil industry.
One of the pillars on which we were founded was being a good steward of the environment, water recycling. We're really proud of our water recycling, building good grassroots support in the community. We're a little bit of an odd duck, but that's okay. We're proud of it.
And you do something, I don't know if it's unique or not, but something with methane capture, is that the right term for it?
Yeah, we wanted to minimize our methane emissions. And that's something we did according to an EPA formula.
Okay, so this EPA thing is a theory versus what you did, which was actually measured it in practice. Is that correct?
Exactly right. It's just a bunch of formulas. We multiply the type of equipment we have and the number of those types of equipment by something called an emissions factor. And that's how we get our calculated methane intensity. So not very accurate.
Yeah.
Companies rely on this formula for quick and dirty estimates of their emissions. But critics say it's not much better than a wild guess.
The method that the EPA uses just takes into account sort of a perfect system, like the platonic ideal of a natural gas system. That calculation produces a pretty small number, and experts we've talked to say that the actual number is a lot higher than that.
So the EPA's formula said how much methane was leaking?
0.2 to 0.3%.
0.2 to 0.3% of what you produced?
Yes.
And then you went out and measured it yourselves and found how much was actually leaking?
3.5%.
Okay, that's not an inconsequential difference.
No, it's not.
3.5% of what you're making. So that's a lot of money lost too, in addition to the environmental side.
It is a ton of money lost. Our jaws dropped. They're like, how could this possibly happen? So yeah, we spent a lot of time figuring out how it happened and how to fix it.
Triple Crown got to work fixing their leaks and quickly realized something kind of amazing.
What were the economics of capturing that extra methane that you found out was leaking?
To quantify the value of the gas we've captured since that first survey, about $3.5 million.
Wow.
Compared to say $300,000 to $400,000 all in costs. So this is a wildly profitable project. Our as measured emissions now equal the calculated emissions from the EPA. And we think our experience means it's not an insurmountable problem.
Since first measuring their emissions, Triple Crown has installed some nifty devices to keep an eye out for leakage. Like this laser tower, which detects methane with lasers.
So we're up on a plateau here. What we have here is a piece of technology from a company called LongPath. They use lasers, so we can monitor a lot of our equipment and a lot of our wells from one spot. It keeps costs down, so we'll get about 5 to 10 sweeps per day. So it's almost real time.
So if you do have a leak, do you have to shut everything down, or?
Most leaks we absolutely do not have to shut down. Most of the time the guys can come out here and it's a relatively simple fix, about an hour to fix or so.
Nice.
It's not just about catching and fixing leaks, though. Methane can escape in a lot of different ways, so Triple Crown had to make some upgrades to make sure it was capturing as much as possible.
So in 2021, we did 6 total flyovers, studied where most of the emissions were coming from on Triple Crown's assets, and we found the top emitter was these tanks that you're looking at. And so we invested heavily in trying to capture those emissions. We upgraded the tanks so we could hold more pressure on them and drive that gas to these 2 engines that you see behind you. Those are tank vapor recovery units. So those recover the vapors, compress it, send it into that same pipeline to sales to be processed and power homes.
And obviously there's the environment, but there are large financial incentives to do this too. We can be sustainable. We can align ourselves with the values of society and still make money with those operations.
Sustainable might be a bit of a stretch. We're still talking about fossil fuels, but getting these leaks fixed really matters for the planet. By some estimates, more than a quarter of human-caused warming comes from methane alone. But to really move the needle, it's Triple Crown's big-time competitors that are going to have to get with the program. Companies like ExxonMobil, which produces more than 100 times as much natural gas as Triple Crown.
What are the biggest driving factors in any entity wanting to stop these leaks?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a big public push. So any companies that are public facing or that have investors or that are publicly traded, there's some pressure on them to have a net zero goal, to have a methane pledge. So companies like Duke, there's pressure on them to be better on climate.
Why aren't more companies doing this with greater frequency?
I think just inertia. I think companies, we've done it this way for a long time. Maybe we don't think our emissions that bad. Hey, look, the EPA itself says, according to its calculation, that our emissions are not that bad.
A lot of folks, it might just be a matter of, like, especially the bigger oil and gas companies, these disciplines are different departments and they might not be talking to each other in a way to actually look at the full cycle economics of these things. We have an advantage. We're a smaller operator. All the decision makers are often in the same room together. We're a lot more agile. And there's also a little bit of it's politicized. There's an almost defensive, knee-jerk defensive reaction when it comes to things like this, because it's kind of a lose-lose situation for them often to acknowledge this. Right or wrong, that's been a culture that's being reinforced over many decades.
What's the EPA doing right now? Are they changing their method of measurement?
The EPA defended the current calculation system. They said that this is made, and this calculation was designed with climate advocates and experts had input, and the EPA has proposed new rules that would require oil and gas operators to have cameras that monitor their operations, and then that they would promptly fix any leaks. So that's good. That's better than nothing. There's a lot of companies that are working on this now because there is money in it, because there's investor pressure. Investors want to see companies have lower carbon emissions, from Walmart to Ford. But now methane is kind of on that same list. So to that end, there's companies like Kairos that use satellite imagery to basically have an eye in the sky and spot methane releases around the U.S. and around the world. And it's things that we wouldn't have known before. It's like we never would have known that, some pipeline going through the swamps of Louisiana or the deserts of Texas, had some big old hole in it and was releasing some massive amount of methane. But now there's satellites flying over there looking at methane emissions. So we actually see all these releases, and at least some companies are then using that information and going and plugging those leaks.
So here's hoping the fossil fuel industry gets its act together and realizes that one of the fastest and most effective ways to slow down global warming could also be one of the most profitable.
Because look, as much as I want to believe that even the oil industry cares about saving the planet, a little financial incentive never hurts.
So not only catching the methane from current productions, there needs to be an effort to address all of these thousands and thousands of old wells, particularly the orphan wells that are still leaking. And so there's an oil man who happened to be up in Montana. He was asked to look on some hay that was being produced up there. And being an oil man, he noticed that there was all this methane that was leaking. And it led him to start a nonprofit called Well Done. So we'll hear the story a little bit about Well Done.
Well, according to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, there are just over 3 million abandoned oil and gas wells. And what you see right here just outside of Shelby is one of many, which is why one organization is giving some people the chance to get some hands-on experience and some knowledge when it comes to these abandoned wells. When driving down the highway in many parts of northern Montana, you might sense a strong smell of oil and gas, which is why as part of a 2-day tour, a group called the Well Done Foundation kicked off its field experience where people got to participate in measuring, monitoring, and plugging of an orphaned well. When viewing one of the sites, those participating got a deeper insight of these wells, and the experience attracted more than just Montanans.
Tried to find what nonprofits are working on capping oil and gas wells or working on methane reductions, and really the Well Done Foundation is kind of the only one that is doing this type of work that I've been able to find.
One participant made their way across from Japan, and he explained the significance that this holds for him.
I'm a former city officer, and now I'm interested in orphan well, and so because now in Japan is my city as also we had the same problem orphan well, so that's why now I need to study here. I'm now a PhD student after retirement.
Now the Well
So here's a little promotion piece that the Well Done Foundation has produced about their work.
We're all on rented time here on this earth. How can we make this better for our children and their children? This is simply just the right thing to do. Our passion is at doing things better and leaving it better than the way that we found it. My name is Curtis Shuck, and I am the chairman of the Well Done Foundation and founder of this wonderful opportunity. The mission of Well Done is to identify orphan wells, plug them to stop the methane emission, and restore the surface back to its original state. The process includes a period of about 6 months of monitoring. Then we go in and plug it using a state-approved cement process.
When we close the well, there will be no emissions, so there will be no methane, no CO2 coming out. And then we will restore the land to its previous use, whether that's agriculture or for livestock, or even if it's just a natural kind of grassland.
So today we're on the location of the Allen 31-8. It's one of Montana's orphaned oil wells.
So this is my first orphan, and I'm super excited to see the whole process and to know that we'll be cleaning up the land around it and that will be going back into farmland. Today's well we plugged was about 4,500 metric ton, and that's equal to over 1,000 cars a year.
I have lived in Jewett County for my whole life.
I'm not going to tell you how many years that is, but it's a long time. If you think about the 78 orphan wells that are left here from years and years and years, some of them way back from 1920, can you imagine how much methane gases escaped into our environment?
Methane is 25 times more potent than a normal car is, as far as the carbon dioxide and the carbon footprint.
Right now it's at one well at a time, but there's a lot of wells. There's millions of wells out in the US and Canada that need our attention.
We can make a real impact by closing just one well. Imagine what we can do as we're closing 10 and 100 and 1,000.
Lived in Montana my whole life. I grew up on the reservation up north here of Browning. Well Done is actually creating jobs for us small companies. It's actually good for the farmers, livestock, and everything there.
This is all private money. Every little bit counts. You know, whether it's a full well adoption or a $5 donation, it all goes 100% into the well plugging program.
For a lot of companies that are trying to have a positive carbon footprint or a neutral carbon footprint, this is a way they can use these offsets by adopting a well and getting involved. And I hope that this can just be the beginning of a lot more awareness.
The oil and gas industry is something that we need and we're going to need for a long time, but this stuff is all adding up. Everybody needs to do their part.
Together, we're going to leave a lasting legacy for future generations.
The more people really see what kind of difference we're making out here, the better we'll be.
So since 2019, the Well Done Foundation has capped 45 wells in 14 states, saving over 1 million tons of methane. It's a start, but it's just a start. One of the ways that methane is being addressed is there are a lot of international issues. A lot of our focus today has been methane in the United States, but there has been a global methane initiative for a number of years. It was started 20 years ago, and 14 countries and several key industry groups have joined to form this partnership. They are kind of the cutting edge of finding ways to address the methane problem. And now we've got another little video clip.
Experts agree that slashing methane would be a major step to stay on track with the Paris Agreement goal of limiting global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Methane is a highly potent greenhouse gas. It traps much more heat in the atmosphere than carbon dioxide, about 83 times more heat in its first 20 years. So cutting methane emissions is the best way to limit warming in the short term. And cutting methane will have a massive impact on U.S. climate goals. Reducing methane is a central piece of the Biden administration's climate commitments. The administration is proposing to regulate methane emissions comprehensively in separate federal rules proposed by 3 different agencies. Each rule responds to a mandate from Congress, which requires each agency to focus on a different piece of the methane puzzle. Let's look at how the rules fit together and how they can build on each other to fully leverage the advanced technologies now available that can help to detect and reduce methane emissions. In the United States, oil and gas production is the largest industrial source of methane, contributing about 1/3 of our economy's methane emissions. And methane is the main component of natural gas. As natural gas travels from the wellhead to the consumer, methane can escape in several ways, including unintentional leaks from equipment like valves, intentional venting for safety reasons, and regular maintenance activities. The oil and gas sector is a vast interconnected system in which different owners and operators own and control different parts. Recent studies using satellites, aerial surveys from planes, drones, and continuous emission monitors show that the U.S. has historically undercounted methane emissions from this sector. These newer technologies can help better identify methane leaks because they allow for frequent and comprehensive monitoring compared to older technology that relies on occasional inspection that's less complete. And of course, identifying leaks is the first step to controlling them. The Biden administration is requiring companies to measure, report, and reduce methane emissions through federal rules issued by the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, the Bureau of Land Management, or BLM, and the Pipelines and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration, or PHMSA. EPA is doing 3 rulemakings. These include a rule to reduce emissions, which requires oil and gas operators to install control technologies on production equipment and to look for and fix emission leaks. Another rule to update how facilities measure and report their methane emissions, and a rule to implement a new methane waste charge, which Congress adopted to connect the 2 rules just mentioned. This new program creates financial incentives for large facilities to reduce methane emissions and requires operators to pay a charge based on what emissions they measure and report. And EPA is producing a rule to implement that new program. Meanwhile, BLM is proposing a rule for oil and gas facilities on public lands based on a congressional mandate requiring mitigation of the loss of gas through venting, flaring, and leaking on public lands. And finally, PHMSA is proposing a leak detection and repair rule that sets standards for natural gas pipelines to address public safety risks of gas leaks and environmental benefits of reducing methane emissions. Notably, all 3 agencies are hoping to take advantage of rapidly advancing technologies that can help companies better identify leaks, use improved data about the size and frequency of methane emission events to mitigate leaks, and help owners and operators adjust their operations to reduce emissions. A variety of stakeholders want to know how these regulations fit together and understand their implications. Environmental advocates will want to evaluate whether the rules will reduce emissions in the short term and create incentives to drive additional emission reductions in the future. Owners and operators of oil and gas facilities will want to know how each rule impacts their facilities and whether they need to use multiple technology strategies or a single strategy to comply with the different rules. Companies developing new technologies to detect leaks will want to know if their technology can be used for compliance under each rule. And states and federal agencies will need to understand how to assess compliance with the rules and whether they can use advanced technologies for enforcement. The combination of these new regulatory measures and the availability of new cutting-edge technology has created real momentum to reduce methane emissions from the oil and gas sector. As these federal methane rules evolve, it will be important to consider how they can be designed to work together effectively and how they can collectively create incentives to reduce emissions to the greatest degree possible. While each rule must operate according to its own legal framework, the goal is to make sure the rules work well together and foster incentives for owners and operators of oil and gas facilities to detect leaks swiftly and mitigate those leaks effectively. This collaborative effort across the agencies and with all of the stakeholders can contribute significantly to the overall reduction of methane emissions throughout the oil and gas industry. The Environmental and Energy Law Program is collaborating with stakeholders to help in this work.
So, in order to solve this problem, it takes a lot of complicated rulemaking and legislation. And right now, a lot of the incentive is on the oil industry to be patrolling itself. And we really need to have governmental agencies that are effectively monitoring and guiding the process of eliminating methane as a threat. And so the goal would be oil and gas companies would have to pay a fee for releasing climate warming methane into the atmosphere under the new regulations from the EPA. But they may be weakened by the new administration. Another part of this particular journey is the production of hydrogen from natural gas. The fastest and most reliable path to advance a hydrogen economy is to build low-cost, readily available natural gas and existing natural gas infrastructure. The natural gas hydrogen research focus will on advancing technologies for a carbon neutral production, transportation, and geologic storage of hydrogen sourced natural gas. And thanks to money from the Gates Foundation, a company was established in Seattle, and this is their headquarters in Seattle, called Modern Hydrogen. It got its start in 2015 and is using the pyrolysis reactor method to produce hydrogen from natural gas. And the hydrogen that's produced has many, many benefits as a fuel source and for food and synthetic fuels and various things that hydrogen is being used for. And one of the interesting things about their story is that they produce hydrogen, but then also on the side there is all this carbon that's produced, and most of that carbon is going into building roads. And so this is a little bit story about this new breakthrough industry.
Have you run over a pothole lately? Who hasn't? But what if we could fill these road wreckers with something that actually helps in the battle to slow climate change? Diana Olick has details in her continuing series on climate startups. Diana?
Well, Kelly, potholes are usually filled with asphalt, right? That smelly, tarry material made of some type of gravel and a petroleum-based substance that binds it all together. Now, one startup is helping to make a cleaner, petroleum-free asphalt, which starts, interestingly enough, with natural gas.
Natural gas is a cleaner fuel than oil, but it still emits harmful carbon dioxide when burned. Natural gas is made of carbon and hydrogen. Now, companies like Monolith and Seattle-based startup Modern Hydrogen are using new technologies to create a cleaner hydrogen, which is also resulting in another useful byproduct.
Modern Hydrogen produces clean hydrogen without needing renewable power. We do this by splitting natural gas into hydrogen and solid carbon.
Clients put the Modern Hydrogen system where they would normally use their natural gas, but the system first separates the gas into solid carbon and clean hydrogen. The client then uses that emission-free hydrogen fuel, and a portion of it is also used to power the system. As for that leftover carbon, Modern Hydrogen actually has a second business. It sells it to asphalt makers. Using carbon instead of the usual petroleum makes the asphalt stronger, cheaper, and greener.
There's this $100 billion per year market that wants to buy the solid carbon and puts it into asphalt. And that just helps the whole economics of this decarbonization play.
This is also one of the cheaper ways for Modern Hydrogen's industrial clients who are pressured by investors and regulators to decarbonize.
Decarbonization isn't free. So we're always looking for the least cost, least risk way of doing that. This technology is probably a medium expense to low expense, and that's what we're trying to figure out with the technology.
Modern Hydrogen is backed by Gates Frontier, At One Ventures, National Grid Partners, Mura Group, and Iron Gray. Total funding so far, $100 million.
Modern Hydrogen now has systems in the U.S. and Canada, and its asphalt is filling potholes in 6 states as well as Canada. Pan says he's looking to expand next into Japan and eventually go global. Back to you guys.
So here's an installation of a modern hydrogen methane pyrolysis device in Portland, Oregon. And one of the things that this particular industry feels is to their advantage is that the Trump administration probably is not going to mess with them because they use natural gas. But they're turning natural gas into hydrogen and collecting the carbon from the process and using it to fill potholes with. So it's an interesting and hopeful new technology. If you want to study more about methane, I found several books that give you lots of scientific information that most of us aren't willing to dig into. But this is a very important subject if we're going to get a handle on the climate issue, as we need to deal with methane, not just the CO2, but methane as well. So now I'm going to turn it over to Ken. I know we have one of the fellows here today has a natural gas car and has some questions about that, and we there may be other questions that people have today.
This voice in the corner is Ken Winter. Someone had a particular question they wanted to raise about this, so I'll carry the microphone over.
So, William Waters here from Auburn. And so Ken has pretty much detailed what the deal was. And so in the 1980s and so forth, they were making natural gas vehicles. I have a natural gas van that I bought with about 5,000 miles on it. And I drove it for about 80,000 miles. There doesn't seem to be any reason to resurrect this anymore because, of course, as you see those big garbage trucks and so forth, clean natural gas. Well, that's bullshit. It's methane. And so these are the ways that they were promoting it that time. But yeah, I don't see any reason to relive it.
Okay, thank you. Appreciate it. I want to express my thanks to Ken Moore. As I was saying, this is an interest area for me, and you've updated my bank of information about a lot of things here. I was making some notes. I've got some emails to write and see what I can do to boost this, because as I think most of us got from the presentation today, this is the way to make the most difference in the shortest period of time. And time is short for our kids, grandkids. We need to move on this, and this is the best way to get traction. Other questions or comments? Yeah, Barb.
So we have a link on our website for if you're flying and you want to do some carbon offsets. So I'll add well done to that. So.
And just to follow up on that question, yes, you get to the PICA website by typing in PCOFT.org/PICA, P-E-C-A, and that'll get you to the web pages where you can navigate a bunch of information and also find out about future programs, for example. Ken Moore.
Just a comment. I learned about the Well Done Foundation from an article in Reader's Digest magazine, of all things. Yeah.
Cool. So in other words, there's information out there if we keep our eyes open. And it would be great to bring that stuff here. If you run across information about climate topics, please share it with us, and we'll see if that bubbles up and we might actually do something more with it. Thank you. Yep.
In California, the biggest methane leak we've had that wiped out any and all of our climate efforts was the Alviso storage facility that leaked for over a year and poisoned all its neighbors. And it's been closed, but the governor just reopened it. And so you could probably contact the governor and tell him he's made another mistake. Yeah.
Storage area with Southern California.
Yeah. We should.
Aliso, A-L-I-S-O, Aliso Canyon.
Aliso Canyon, that's right. I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And speaking of elected officials, my apprentice made these up. There's a petition circulating that you can access via this flyer, and it over 2,000 people have signed it already, and it asks our local member of Congress, Kevin Kiley, to hold a town hall meeting so that we can tell him that, like these three rules that these three agencies are implementing on the federal level, that are being coordinated by the lawyers at Harvard that we just heard about, that those not be gutted going forward in the new administration. So yeah, we need to call Kevin Kiley out to meet his constituent. Okay, thank you. Good stuff. Someone else? Once again, to remind you, Pika has a third Thursday movie night that's going to be at Auburn Presbyterian Church again. I don't have with me the flyer for the topic that night, but again, it's on that website. Oh, good. Ken Moore is going to hop in and get the ad that I should have printed off and brought with me today and didn't. And then, of course, next month we will be back here. We will need a new site for our meeting in April. In May. So, because this facility is already spoken for. So, think around about where we might meet up to share presentation in May. The Climate Movie Night is a film called Attempt Climate Optimism. Find out which solutions give us the most bang for our buck and look for some optimism amidst the negative climate headlines from 2024. It's a good time of year to kind of dive into that. So again, 6:30 p.m. at Auburn Presbyterian Church, our Pika Climate Movie Night. Once again, thanks for coming out today on an odd weather sort of day. Have yourselves a good day, everybody. Bye-bye.